Hello, fellow survivors. Let me start out by thanking the community, all of you, for your support and positive encouragement in making my first video on weather in the long dark. Following the feedback on that video, I started putting together the material to make this video. I will not be providing all the experimental background and data from the first video in this second installment, so I would strongly encourage you to watch the first video before watching this one. Here are the questions and issues we'll be covering in this video. First, we'll examine weather data collected in the far territories and make some comparisons to Lower Great Bear. Second, we'll examine the developer's console to see what we can learn from it. Much of this will center around the weather HUD. We'll see what we can learn about weather patterns, when dice rolls are made, and how much weather is faded. We'll also talk about what is called transition weather, which is a system that handles weather changes as you travel between regions. We'll also say something about weather during auroras. Lastly, I'll clarify a bit about the relationship between wind chill and wind speed. I realized that I was a little careless when discussing this topic in the last video. I won't fully recap the experiment I performed in the previous video, but I will summarize by saying that I collected data like weather, temperature, and wind chill at fixed times of day over a course of many days at a fixed location on interloper settings. The times and what they look like on the standard HUD can be seen here. The two locations I selected in the far territories were the last lonely house in Sundered Pass and the hangar in Forsaken Airfield. I suppose I was following the pattern of the first video, selecting possible base locations for data collection points, and out of practicality selecting locations where I could stockpile food and water for the data collection period. While it is unknown if or how much weather varies within the regions of Lower Great Bear, it is known that Sundered Pass does get colder the higher you go, so we know for certain this data is only valid for the floor of the pass. In the last video, I described 5 types of weather that I recorded during my experiment by observing the in-game environment during data collection. These are snow, fog, clear, cloudy, and blizzard. For data collection in the far territories, I'm adding glimmer fog to this list. Let's first consider the last lonely house in Sundered Pass. The weather pattern breakdown at the lonely house most resembles Coastal Highway or Mystery Lake. The percentage of time for blizzards was 16% during the study period, very much in line with Lower Great Bear. The lonely house actually had the highest percentage of clear days and times of any location studied at 35%. Glimmer fog was observed 7% of the time, and the combination of fog and glimmer fog was below the levels of fog seen in Lower Great Bear. Forsaken Airfield was another story altogether. Here I observed the most blizzards I had ever observed in the 7 regions studied. We'll revisit this point later, but I believe that this is due primarily to the length of blizzards at Forsaken Airfield. Glimmer fog also seemed to be more frequent here than in Sundered Pass at about 15% of the time, consistent with my previous non-scientific observations. The airfield had among the least clear days at 23%. I would argue that this has got to be about the worst weather in the game. Looking at temperature, we can see the difference with the far territories. I presented this graph of average temperature over various times of day in my last video. As a reminder, these data points were acquired at post 50 days on Interloper, when the temperature had settled at its lowest. Note that we are removing any temperature data points during blizzards from the average for reasons explained in the last video. I've added the lonely house and the airfield hangar in purple and black. Before discussing the obvious differences, it's important to note 2 similarities, weather-wise, between Lower Great Bear and the far territories. First, the temperature shift through the day-night cycle seems to generally function the same in all regions, with the world warming through the day until 4 p.m. Second, the standard deviation is comparable across all locations, between 1 to 2 degrees. But that's where the similarities end. At 4 p.m., the warmest time of day, the difference between most of Lower Great Bear and the far territories is about 10 degrees. Here we'll take a closer look at Forsaken Airfield and compare it to Coastal Highway and Timberwolf Mountain that represent the range of temperatures in Lower Great Bear. I've included the standard deviation error bars and acquired an additional time point at 8 p.m. Interestingly, 4 and 6 p.m. are comparable at the hangar with a drop in temperature seen at 8 p.m. The window between 3 and 8 p.m. would be the warmest time at the airfield. It's surprisingly late in the day and runs into the night. and it should be noted that with an average of minus 36, you'll likely never feel warm in this region on Interloper. Here I've done the same analysis for the Lonely House in Sundered Pass. It's a degree or so warmer than the airfield, and has a symmetrical warming and cooling pattern around the 4 p.m. time point. Again, the warmest time to be outside would be that 2 to 7 p.m. range. We'll hold off on a discussion of wind chill until the end of the video, but I'll present a calculation of the feels like temperature for those regions, as I did in the first video. For comparison, here's what Coastal Highway looks like, with a plus 27 cold bonus and plus 14 wind protection values from close with cold fusion. As you can see on Interloper, in the warmest regions in Great Bear, one can be warm or barely cold for several hours in the afternoon without blizzards. In contrast, here's the feels like temperature at the airfield with the same gear and the 8 p.m. time point added in. You'll note that the blizzards in darkest blue are on average much longer here, where in Coastal Highway blizzards mostly range from 2 to 4 hours, spanning 2 or 3 data collection intervals. Here you can see many blizzards span 4 or more data collection points, some lasting the entire day. I've seen comments in my last video from players observing that blizzards are longer in the far territories. This seems to be true. As you can see here, during non-blizzard times, the feels like temperature is something like 10 to 15 degrees cooler with the equivalent gear, counting the lower temperatures and lower wind chill. During the data collection at the last Lonely House, you can see that blizzards were less frequent but still seem to have a propensity to last large portions of the day. This seems to be a feature of the far territories. You'll also note that the Lonely House is slightly warmer than the airfield, and it should be noted that the clothing bonuses I'm using for this calculation were considered good endgame gear prior to the Broken Silence update. Now with the Cougar Wrap, double wolfskin pants, double improvised insulation, and your standard gear in perfect repair, you can theoretically get to plus 36 or plus 37 warmth bonus from clothes, meaning you can be warm on some afternoons at the Lonely House. I'll wrap up this section with some comments on base location in the far territories. This may be a hot take, but I would argue that the Lonely House is probably the best base location in the far territories, with the next runner-up being the Island Cottage in Forsaken Airfield. The weather is arguably better on the floor of Sundered Pass than Forsaken Airfield, with fewer blizzards, slightly warmer temperatures, and many more sunny days. Given how cold the far territories are, the advantage in finding deer, wolves, and rabbits almost immediately outside your front door at the Lonely House means you don't have to travel long distances in the cold to collect food. A workbench can be built inside the Lonely House for easier crafting, and the pass floor is loaded with wood for fire and crafting furniture. The only major deficiency is fish to combat scurvy. This is where the Island Cottage has the advantage, but it is possible to fish the Ambler's Lake fishing hut on the upper levels and bring fish and coal from the abandoned mine down by Travaux. Establishing a well-stocked base in the far territories is definitely an endgame objective that can only be undertaken with the best gear possible on Interloper. In this next section, I will present some observations made using the developer's console. The debug weather command allows one to gather some additional information about how weather functions in the long dark. Note that the information presented in this section is beyond what could normally be learned in standard gameplay. If you don't want to have this information, stop watching now. I'll start by describing the various pieces of information provided by this debug display. The first line is a kind of counter that moves through the time of day and night. So I'll simply call this the day-night cycle timer. For the first 6 phases from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., you'll observe the percentage ticking up from 1 to 100%. Therefore, you'll watch the percentage tick much faster through the early morning and evening 1-hour cycles, in contrast to the 2 5-hour cycles during the day. I would guess these cycles are tied to lighting effects. These short cycles at dawn and dusk are likely why the weather looks different and beautiful at these times. During the night, this counter sits at 100% for all 10 hours. These next lines show the weather set. The weather set includes the type of weather, like clear in this case, and the region that the player was in when the set initiated, in this case Coastal Highway. The next 2 values are the total length of the weather set, 2.4 hours, and the percentage completion of the weather set. In the line or lines below this first line, you can see the step or steps within this weather set. In this case, there is only one step of clear weather. The TR percentage shows the progress of the transition period between weather steps. There are a few things that can be learned from these weather sets. When studying the weather with the developer's console, I started a new interloper game, and then used the console to turn on God mode and pass 1200 hours to reach the post 50-day time when the weather has stabilized at its coldest. Interestingly, passing 50 days took about 1 hour in real time. Past day 51, I then passed time to record one weather set after the next in Coastal Highway. The average weather set length is around 4.5 hours, with most in the range of 3 to 5 hours. This explains why 4 hours of past time is almost always enough to change the weather or end a blizzard that is already underway in lower Great Bear. Most of the longer weather sets recorded on that list are blizzards, which seem to have the most steps, transitioning from light to heavy snow, then to blizzards, and then back through heavy and light snow, as seen here. While the longest weather sets observed in this small study were around 6 to 7 hours, it is likely that the far territories allow for longer weather sets, which would explain the all-day blizzards that are observed in those regions. The random roll to select the next weather set occurs at the very end of the previous weather set. Watch here as I duck inside the garage and save the game at the end of a blizzard, and then reload the game a number of times. You'll observe reloading just seconds before the change of the weather results in a different weather set on each reload, from fog to clear to cloudy to light snow. Some have suggested that the weather is decided in advance. This is not true. In contrast, reloading the game in the middle of the steps of a weather set, like this blizzard, has no impact on the steps that follow. From the start of this 7.5 hour weather set, the blizzard and the snow steps are fated to happen. You'll recall that I said that the name of a weather set includes the location the player was in when the weather set started. This is significant and results in a blending of weather between regions. In this example, I start in Forlorn Muskeg on a clear late morning, called Marsh Region in the weather set. I'll use the fly ability to travel quickly to the hangar in Forsaken Airfield. Now you'll notice that although I have traveled through multiple regions, the weather set still reads Clear Marsh Region. What's more, after passing some time to around 4 p.m., I observe that the current temperature is minus 31 degrees. In my previous 40-day weather experiment, the warmest temperature I recorded at the hangar was minus 34, and the average at 4 p.m. was minus 36. The warmer Muskeg weather has blended with that of the airfield. Now observe that we've fully transitioned into the next weather pattern, dense fog airfield. But the temperature is now minus 32. Again, this is about 4 or 5 degrees warmer than we would normally expect it to be. I've observed this phenomenon in my main interloper run, when traveling into Timberwolf Mountain from warmer areas. This phenomenon can be taken advantage of in your game. You can expect several hours, perhaps half a day, of better weather when traveling from Broken Railroad into the far territories. If the weather is agreeable in this situation, you may want to have coffee and or cooked food ready in order to continue traveling through the transfer pass to your final destination. Conversely, it may be ideal to stop in Broken Railroad at the maintenance shed upon returning from the far territories in order to let the cold far territories weather pass. Let's briefly discuss auroras. This is a clip of an aurora progressing with the weather debug display active. You can see that an aurora is a distinct weather set which has a set length. The TR or transition timer seems to run in parallel to the aurora alpha counter. Somewhere between 90 and 100% into this transition, you see the electronics turn on. Auroras as a weather set can start randomly during the night and will continue into the day. As you can see here, when 7 a.m. arrives, we enter the night to dawn transition. The aurora alpha counter starts counting down, and the major electric effects end somewhere between 1 and 0.9 on this counter. The last of the aurora effects fade over that hour, and in this case, we start the day with over an hour left in the weather pattern. As the name of this weather set implies, it is clear during daytime hours. This is why auroras are often followed by a clear morning, although this may not always be the case when a weather set changes just before or just after dawn. You can take advantage of these clear skies and start a Maglens fire immediately after an aurora. Lastly, let's talk about wind speed and wind chill. Wind chill is the only thing that is knowable or measurable in a standard game. But looking at the weather debug display, it is clear there's a lot going on under the hood. What is the relationship between these numbers, and can this teach us anything useful? I used the previously presented data from the console and status screen to study these relationships. There seems to be a linear relationship between wind intensity and wind speed base, although there appears to be two different linear relationships that can be seen at lower versus higher wind speed. If I had to guess, I would say that we are looking at an interconversion between an RNG number and the wind speed in miles per hour. It remains possible that this conversion factor is different in different regions. All the data points here were collected in one region, Coastal Highway. The gust strength is in near perfect linear relationship with the wind actual speed minus the wind base speed. Again, I would guess we are seeing an interconversion between an RNG number for wind gust and the actual gust speed in miles per hour. This is then added to the base wind speed to get the actual wind speed. I believe this actual speed is then affecting things like the ability to maintain a fire, slowing travel speed, and wind chill. So what is the relationship between actual wind speed and wind chill? Others have pointed this out. There appears to be some kind of equation by which wind chill is calculated that includes actual wind speed, temperature, and some other factor. This dot plot of actual wind speed versus wind chill seems to indicate that actual wind speed is the primary factor. Look at these two instances in which the actual wind speed was 5.7 miles per hour. In one case, the temperature was minus 27, and the other minus 43. Note that the wind chill factor is minus 8 and minus 11 degrees, respectively. So the colder the temperature, the worse the wind chill factor at any given actual wind speed. This is why, as some have observed, it takes a lower wind chill value to blow out fires in the far territories. Fires are blown out by the actual wind speed. The wind speed threshold for fires being blown out will result in a lower observed wind chill, given the temperatures are generally lower in the far territories. Since this equation has not been solved, I can't say much more about this relationship. To summarize, the far territories are cold. In the afternoon, we're talking about 8 to 10 degrees colder than most parts of Lower Great Bear. The far territories appear to be prone to longer blizzards as well. A survivor should be prepared to enter these regions with the warmest possible clothes and extra food in case one is pinned down in bad weather. The Lonely House in Thunder Pass has better weather than the airfield, and in my opinion is one of the best locations for a base in the far territories. Many of the weather rules established in the last video still apply in the far territories. The late afternoon is the warmest part of the day, and roughly 2 to 8 p.m. is the best stretch of time to be outside in all areas tested. Through the use of the console, we've learned that weather sets that define types of weather follow rules. On average, these sets last around 3 to 5 hours, and it seems to be the result of a random roll that occurs immediately before the next weather set begins. Auroras are a unique weather set that occurs at night. When this weather set continues past 7 a.m., it results in a sunny morning. Lastly, you can bring weather from a temperate region into a cold one, and vice versa. This creates an opportunity for easier travel when first entering a cold region from a temperate one. More questions still remain concerning the weather. Measurements could be made in other areas like Zone of Contamination or the upper levels of Sundered Pass. A more in-depth study of weather sets is also needed. Do all weather sets have equal probabilities of occurring? We presume not, given the 40-day measurements of weather we've previously done, but this can be more rigorously tested with the console and a large number of reloaded tests. Also, given the console records time between last blizzard and the number of blizzards in a run, is there a minimum or maximum time between blizzards? Lastly, the formula relating wind speed and wind chill factor could be presumably solved with enough data. As I close, let me say that I appreciate all the likes, subscribes, and comments. I'm a busy professional that will probably never make a dime off of YouTube, but these interactions motivate me to make more content to share with this fantastic community. Thanks for watching, and I hope this presentation helps you manage the weather in the long dark.